How shall I begin? Let me think. Yes. Let me ask you the question. Can faith live in an immoral woman? Can faith live in an immoral woman? You know, I'm asking you the question because that question just kept going through my mind again and again. It was because I dishonored my body for commercial purposes. Well, actually, that's just a nice way of saying that I worked as a prostitute. Yes, officially I was an innkeeper, but in my time that included additional services. How did it all begin? No, you don't need to know what happened in order to listen to my story, but I wondered about it myself sometimes. Was that evil root planted when I was still a child? Was it seduction or force that caused that downward spiral? Or you don't know how we lived. You had no idea why I didn't live with my family. But, no, it's right. It's not important anymore. It's not important anymore. All you need to know is that I earned a living using my body. My house on the thick walls was very well known. I performed my services with the approval of the authorities. I've heard that it's not much different now in your time, is it? Prostitution is even legalized. Not much has changed in thousands of years. And yet, despite the way I was living, I sometimes felt a deep desire within me for a better, a different life. I was especially disgusted with the service, the worship they called it, of Jericho's filthy gods. There was a yearning deep within me. There was a feeling, I can't give it another name than homesickness. Sometimes at night, I looked out of my window, out into a star-filled sky, and I wondered about a yearning that was tugging at my hardened heart. It was a strange sense of wanting to go away there in the night, in the darkness, and go somewhere where nobody would know me, and I could start all over again. I guess, thinking back, that some of those feelings had to do with the stories that I'd been hearing ever since I was a child. And even when I grew up, and traveling traders came into my inn for hospitality and indulgence, I heard those stories again. There were always stories about a people called the Hebrews. They used to live in Egypt, were treated badly, slave labor. But then somehow, after terrible disasters, Pharaoh, the ruler of Egypt, allowed them to go out, to walk away from the slavery into freedom. Yes, it came at a cost to to Egypt. While the Hebrews were walking, the Egyptians were wailing. And then I heard stories about how they went out, but came in front of a great lot of water, the Red Sea or the Reed Sea, as it's sometimes called. And they were stuck. And at the same time that they found themselves stuck in front of this water, Pharaoh, who had changed and hardened his heart again, came after them with his army. But then there was this God of the Hebrews, who did a huge miracle for them. The water split. There were two dividing walls of water, and the Hebrews walked through on dry land. But when Pharaoh and his army tried to follow them, these walls of water came crashing down, and all of them drowned. Yes, that was a time of terrible destruction for Egypt. And then I heard stories about, I don't know, mysterious things that happened in the desert. It had to do with the worship of this God that was so different. I heard also how these slaves were changed as they wandered for many years in the desert, and they became soldiers who were fighting and winning mighty battles. And again, I heard about the God of the Hebrews. Something happened to me because of it. Because I recognized that this was a God of might and action. So different from the gods that we knew in Jericho. Milcom, Baal, Chemosh, Astaroth. Cruel, vengeful and brutal gods. But this seemed to me a God who was worthy to be worshipped, to be honored. And I can't explain it, but somehow hope began to grow in me. Then, this was really strange. For you see, the Hebrews came closer to Jericho. And after what we heard about them, everybody was scared. People were speculating about what was going to happen. They were anxious. But strangely, as there was fear all around me, faith and hope began to rise up in me even more. And so, when one day, two men walked into my inn, and I recognized them as being Hebrews, and I suspected they were Hebrew spies, my heart skipped a beat, and yet I welcomed them in. I realized they would need to find refuge, for other people in Jericho had seen them too, and they went to the king to tell him about it. And yes, sometime later, the soldiers came barging into my place. Those men that have come to your place, hand them over to us. They are Hebrew spies. Where are they? I looked at them as innocently as possible. As I said, oh yes, certainly. These men were here. I didn't know they were spies. Listen, they left already again. They went out of the gate. They said they wanted to leave before the gate closed. Go after them quickly. I'm sure you will catch them. Yes, I knew that I lied and that I committed treason. And I also knew that there would be no mercy for me. if anybody would find out about what I had done, that I had helped these men. For that's what I did. After we spoke briefly, I said, follow me. Come, because the king's soldiers will come looking for you. And I went up to the roof, and they followed me. Now, because my house was on the city wall, nobody could see what was happening on the roof. I had flax there. I used it to make linen, to get some extra income. But now, that became a perfect hiding place for these men. And they stayed there until it was evening. And then, when it was completely dark, I went up to them and I told them what had happened. But that's when I also made a covenant with them. I said, I know that your God is going to give you the land. We have heard about the miracles that He has done for you. Everybody is scared. Nobody has any courage left. I know that your God is a real God and that He reigns everywhere. That's why I've hidden you. Now then, promise me that when you come into the land, that you will spare me and my family. Give me a sure sign that when your God gives you the city, that we will be safe. And they promised. They promised that it would be their life or mine. If you don't tell anybody about us, they said, then when Adonai gives us the land, we will treat you kindly. And after that, I helped them to escape. From my window, I took a rope, and that rope came down on the outside of the city walls. And that's how they could get away. But before they left, they told me to take a scarlet cord and hang it outside that same window. And that scarlet cord would be that visible sign of the covenant that we had made. And then they went away into the darkness of the night. It was about a week later, I would say, that suddenly the whole city was in commotion again. And it was about a miracle that the God of the Hebrews had done for His people again. They were in front of the Jordan River. And again, they walked through with dry feet. Now that was not easy because the Jordan was overflowing its banks at the time. I kept watching to see what was happening. Everybody was just stuck because they couldn't tear themselves away from the view that was in front of them. Jericho is above a plain, so we could see what was happening. And people were milling around everywhere. Yes. I think it was a couple of days later when we saw those people in a different way. Because now, this multitude of Hebrews came in a solemn procession walking up to Jericho. It was eerie. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the spine-tingling sound of the shofars that was being blown by the priests. And as they came closer, they circled around the city. They couldn't get in. The gates were firmly closed, but they didn't even try. They just circled and went back to their camp. In the meantime, I'd gone to my window once in a while to check that this scarlet cord was still there. I bent over to see it because this cord was going to save my life. I knew my life depended on it. In the city, people were just getting more and more fearful. Little groups were talking in the street. They didn't know what was happening. And the tension became almost unbearable. But strangely, while everyone around me was filled with fear, I was filled with faith and hope, for I had made a covenant with the people of this God. Now, after that first time, strange, they came back every day, 6 days in a row, and just did the same thing. We had no idea what was going on. And then came day 7. And in that time we thought, oh, well, they'll go around again one time. But now they surprised us because they went around and around and around 6 times in a row. And all the time in that strange silence with the shofars blowing. But then came the 7th time. And suddenly one of the commanders shouted a shout. And as he did that, all the people shouted as well. And that sound shattered the silence that had almost hypnotized us. And then, incredible. Those heavy walls that had been there for ages started to rumble, to shake, to crumble, and they fell down and sank into the ground. And the city was open. By faith, those walls of Jericho came down. But by faith, one part of the wall was still standing. My house was safe and secure. I had convinced my family to come stay with me, and we were spared. I kept my part of the covenant, and the God of the Hebrews kept his part. My faith was rewarded. Oh, yes. At that time, my life was dirty and damaged by sin. But faith gave it a new shine. I believed in the God of the Hebrews. And yes, I was saved from death and destruction when these walls came down. But oh, all this did so much more in my life. Because the God of the Hebrews took my life and he cleansed it and he restored it. My whole lifestyle's changed after that. I even married one of the leaders of the Hebrews. And Salmon and his family, they told me about the God of the Hebrews more and more. And you know, he became my God. And I was one of his people. Salmon and I had a son called Boaz. And it's really peculiar that later on, much later, he also married a foreign lady. Her name is Ruth. And today, as it is Erev Shavuot, her story will be told all over the world. And maybe one day you should ask her to come and tell her story to you too. Both of us, in our own way, found that faith is a secure and certain trust in God and in His Word. Yes, I was still Rahab, but I was transformed. All my sadness and my longing and my emptiness was gone. God granted my desire for a brand new life, and He even gave me a family. Yes, the God of the Hebrews is a God of might and justice and action. But I found, as I got to know Him, that He's also a God of compassion and love. And He is the God who's still in the business of restoring and changing lives. And I'll tell you one more thing so that you know exactly how it happens. One of my descendants was someone called Yeshua. And he came to save his people from their sins. You remember how I said that the spies were going to give their lives for mine, and how the scarlet cord was the visible sign of a covenant. Well, Yeshua came, and He a new covenant. And you know, it was His life that was given for you and for me, for all the world. And it was His scarlet blood that is the visible sign of the new covenant that He made. And the beautiful thing is that just as I was, as it were, grafted into the people of God, that possibility is now for all Gentiles. All Gentiles who believe in Yeshua and who are cleansed and made righteous by His blood and through His sacrifice, they can be grafted in. Oh, what a blessing. Jew and Gentile together under Jesus. Yeshua, who came to save His people from their sin. Make sure you're grafted in. Make sure that you share the message about how it can be possible. I'm Rahab. And as Rahab, I was not pretty to look at. My life was dirty. But I can tell you that there is now a brand new Rahab. And you can also be brand new. So never give up. Never give up. Keep faith and hope alive in your heart. Shalom. May peace be with you always.